What if the most unsettling secret in this entire royal saga isn't hiding in palace walls, but inside a family that no longer speaks? Think about that for a second. For years, the world has been trained to see this story one way: a modern fairy tale gone wrong. A brave woman escaping cruelty. A prince choosing love over duty. Simple, clean, easy to digest. But what if that version only exists because another voice was erased? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates, because tonight, one man is refusing to stay silent any longer. A man the world laughed at, ignored, discredited, a man who says he has been watching something unfold in slow motion and screaming into the void while no one listened. That man is Thomas Markle. And according to him, the truth about his daughter isn't just uncomfortable. It's explosive. This isn't a polished interview. It isn't a Netflix documentary with dramatic lighting and sympathetic music. It's a broken relationship spilling into public view. A father claiming he was cut off, shut out, and slowly erased from his own child's life. Ask yourself this: how does a father go from walking his daughter down the aisle to not even knowing where his grandchildren are growing up? That doesn't happen overnight. Thomas Markle says the cracks appeared long before the wedding, long before the cameras, long before the palace gates closed. He claims there were warning signs: sudden distance, carefully rewritten narratives, conversations that felt rehearsed, emotions that no longer matched the story being told. And here's the contradiction that keeps bothering people. If Thomas Markle is just a bitter attention-seeking parent, why has his version barely changed over the years? Same pain, same accusations, same unanswered questions. Meanwhile, the official story kept evolving. At first, it was about privacy. Then it was about mental health. Then it was about protection. Then it was about survival. Each explanation made sense on its own. But stacked together, some people started noticing gaps, silences, missing pieces. And that's where the children enter the conversation. Not as targets. Not as accusations, but as the center of a growing mystery. Because according to Thomas Markle, it's not just that he has never met his grandchildren, it's that he believes the entire family has been deliberately cut out of their lives. No visits, no photos, no phone calls, no medical updates. Nothing. Ask yourself this: is that normal? Or is that control? He doesn't call it kidnapping. He doesn't use legal language. He uses emotional language. He says something far more disturbing. He says the children have been taken away from their roots, from their bloodline, from half of who they are. And that word he uses, stolen, isn't about crime. It's about erasure. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Why does this conversation make so many people nervous? Is it because it involves children? Or is it because it challenges a story that millions emotionally invested in? Thomas Markle claims he was painted as toxic so he could be removed without resistance. That once the world accepted him as the villain, no one would ask what happened next. And maybe that's why this story matters now. Because public sentiment is shifting. People are tired of perfectly curated narratives. They're starting to question why certain voices are platformed endlessly, while others are silenced completely. They're asking why some family members are allowed to grieve publicly, while others are mocked for doing the same. And Thomas Markle is asking the most dangerous question of all: what if the truth was never meant to come out? Because according to him, there's a moment, a specific turning point, a decision that changed everything, a line that was crossed, after which reconciliation was no longer allowed. And once you hear what he claims happened next, you'll understand why this family may never be put back together again. Before the wedding, before the titles, before the cameras followed every step, there was a warning. Not shouted, not dramatic, just quiet concern that no one wanted to hear. According to Thomas Markle, the distance didn't begin after fame. It began before it. Subtle at first, missed calls, short replies, conversations that felt strangely scripted. He says there was a moment when he realized he was no longer talking to his daughter. He was talking to a version of her that had already been edited for the public. Ask yourself this: how many parents recognize that feeling too late? Thomas claims that long before the royal family ever entered the picture, something had shifted. The warmth was replaced by caution, spontaneity replaced by calculation. He remembers asking simple questions and receiving answers that felt managed, as if someone else was already thinking about how those words would sound one day. And here's the detail people often gloss over. Thomas Markle wasn't a distant father. He wasn't absent. He wasn't a stranger suddenly demanding access. By his account, he was present, supportive, and proud, until pride became inconvenient. Then came the wedding. You remember the headlines, the drama, the fallout, the framing. One man's heart attack turned into a punchline. One family crisis turned into proof of toxicity. But Thomas says the real damage happened quietly, off camera. He claims the door didn't slam shut. It closed slowly. Emails unanswered. Calls returned days later, if at all. Every attempt to reconcile reframed as manipulation. Every expression of concern reframed as betrayal. And this is where the contradiction starts to nag. If he was truly dangerous, why was there no attempt at mediation? If he was truly abusive, why was there no boundary conversation, only total erasure? If he was truly irrelevant, why did his existence need to be publicly discredited? Thomas Markle believes the answer is simple and unsettling. Because cutting someone off is easier when the world already hates them. He says once the narrative locked in, everything else followed. He became the cautionary tale, the example, the warning to anyone else who might question the storyline. And then came the grandchildren. This is where his voice changes. He doesn't speak with anger. He speaks with disbelief. According to him, there were no announcements to the family, no shared joy, no pictures sent privately, no opportunities to say congratulations, let alone hold a newborn. Just silence. Think about that. A grandfather learning about his grandchildren the same way strangers do, through headlines, through edited images, through carefully released statements. Thomas doesn't claim legal wrongdoing, he claims something more personal. He claims intentional separation. He says he realized then that this wasn't about privacy, it was about control, about deciding who exists in the children's world and who doesn't. And when he tried to ask why, he says the silence deepened. Here's where many viewers feel torn. On one hand, parents have the right to protect their children, to set boundaries, to walk away from pain. On the other hand, complete erasure raises questions, especially when the explanation keeps changing. Ask yourself honestly, wouldn't you want your children to know where they come from? Thomas Markle insists he wasn't asking for access, he was asking for acknowledgement, for reassurance, for proof that the family he helped build hadn't been rewritten out of existence. And according to him, that request crossed a line, because once he pushed back, even gently, he became the enemy. He believes that's when the story shifted from distance to something far more deliberate, because the next claim he makes isn't about missed calls or broken relationships. It's about a decision that ensured the separation would be permanent. And once you hear what Thomas Markle says was decided behind closed doors, the silence suddenly makes terrifying sense. There's a reason most interviews stop right before this part. Because this is where discomfort sets in, where casual curiosity turns into unease, where people stop asking what's true and start asking what they're allowed to question. According to Thomas Markle, there was a moment when he realized this wasn't just estrangement anymore. It wasn't hurt feelings. It wasn't boundaries. It was a permanent rewrite. And the rewrite had a purpose. He says the explanation given to the public never quite matched the reality happening behind the scenes. Privacy was the word used. Protection, safety, healing. All reasonable, all understandable, all impossible to argue against without sounding cruel. But here's the contradiction that refuses to go away. Privacy usually means fewer cameras, fewer statements, less storytelling. What he saw instead was something different. Carefully timed appearances, selective images, highly controlled narratives. A story that was told often, but never fully. Ask yourself this. How do you keep something private while talking about it constantly? Thomas claims that once the children were born, the control intensified. Not over their lives, but over their existence in the public imagination. What was shared, what wasn't. Who was acknowledged, who was erased. And this is where that explosive word enters the conversation. Stolen. Not in the legal sense. Not in the criminal sense. He's very clear about that. He doesn't allege kidnappings or forged documents or anything that would hold up in a courtroom. He means something more disturbing. He means emotionally removed, familiarly severed, historically erased. According to him, the children were taken away from half of their identity before they ever had a chance to know it existed. No grandparents, no cousins, no family stories, no sense of origin, just one version of reality. And here's the part that makes people shift in their seats. Thomas Markle says this wasn't an accident. He believes it was a decision made quietly, firmly, and without any intention of reversal. He says that once he was labeled a liability, everyone connected to him became one too. That reconciliation would undermine the story. That acknowledging him would raise questions no one wanted to answer. So instead, the past was sealed off. Ask yourself this: how powerful does a narrative have to be before it replaces blood? This isn't about proving anything. It's about patterns. Children introduced to the world, then pulled back. Appearances teased, then withheld. Names revealed, then locked behind silence. And the public filled in the gaps with whatever story they preferred. Thomas says he watched it happen in real time. That every time he spoke up, the response was louder condemnation, not engagement. Ridicule instead of rebuttal. Silence instead of clarification. And silence, as you know, is a strategy. He insists the children themselves are not the issue. He never criticizes them, never speculates about their well-being, never crosses that line. His pain is about exclusion, about knowing that there are birthdays he will never attend, first steps he will never witness, questions they may ask one day that he will never be allowed to answer. Think about the irony. A family that speaks endlessly about compassion, practicing absolute erasure, a movement built on truth-telling, refusing dialogue, a story about breaking cycles, repeating one of the oldest cycles there is, silencing the inconvenient parent. Thomas Markle believes the hardest part isn't being hated by the public. It's knowing that his grandchildren may grow up believing he never cared. And then he says something that makes this entire story feel unfinished. He claims there is one more layer, one detail he has held back, not because it isn't important, but because revealing it would permanently destroy any chance of reconciliation. A line once crossed. And if what he's hinting at is true, then this story isn't about a broken family anymore. It's about a truth that was never meant to surface. What if the most revealing part of this entire story isn't what's been said, but what still hasn't? Because after all the interviews, all the documentaries, all the statements, all the carefully chosen words, we're left with something unsettling, a void. And according to Thomas Markle, that void isn't accidental. Think back to the opening question. What if the most disturbing secret in this saga isn't about royalty or fame or titles, but about who gets erased when a narrative becomes more important than family? This story began as a fairy tale. It was sold as one, marketed as one, defended as one, and like all powerful stories, it required clear roles: heroes, villains, victims. Thomas Markle says he was cast as the villain before he even knew auditions were happening. And once that role stuck, everything else followed. No nuance, no second chances, no reconciliation arc, just silence. Ask yourself this: in a world where every pain is documented, every trauma explained, every grievance monetized, why is there no room for dialogue here? Why is one voice amplified endlessly, while another is treated as radioactive? The uncomfortable truth is this: silence doesn't always mean innocence, and speaking out doesn't always mean guilt. Sometimes silence is strategy. Thomas isn't asking the public to crown him right. He isn't asking for sympathy. He isn't even asking to be believed. He's asking to be acknowledged, because according to him, the greatest theft wasn't children taken away in the night. It was something far quieter, far cleaner, far easier to deny. It was the theft of connection, of lineage, of memory, of choice. He believes his grandchildren are growing up inside a story where half of themselves has been quietly edited out. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's inconvenient. And here's where this stops being about celebrity gossip. Because how many families recognize this pattern? One person controls the narrative. Another is labeled toxic. Access is cut. Silence becomes permanent. And years later, children are left with questions no one prepared them to answer. Thomas Markle says the hardest part isn't the headlines. It isn't the jokes. It isn't being dismissed as unreliable. It's the idea that one day, two children may ask why an entire side of their family simply vanished. And there will be no honest answer waiting for them. The irony is painful. A public crusade built on truth-telling, built on transparency, built on breaking generational cycles, ended with the oldest cycle of all. Erase the inconvenient parent. Control the story. Hope time does the rest. So where does that leave us? Not with a verdict, not with proof, not with certainty. It leaves us with questions. Why is reconciliation never discussed? Why is silence treated as strength? Why does one man's pain make so many people uncomfortable? And most importantly, what happens when the children grow up and start asking their own questions? Because stories can be managed. Narratives can be curated. People can be erased. But truth has a habit of resurfacing when it's least convenient. And if even a fraction of what Thomas Markle is suggesting is real, then this story isn't finished. It's just been waiting for the moment when silence stops working. And when that moment comes, everything we thought we understood may finally be turned upside down.